I know people are slowly trickling into the room, so I'm just to say hello. Welcome to everybody coming in. This is the Avoiding Common Traps and Allyship session that is being hosted by the Faculty Male Advocates and Allies for Equity group through the Center of Excellence for Women in Technology. And this is all a part of our annual summit on women in technology that we host to celebrate, support, encourage, and provide skills for not only women seeking to enter the world of technology in their own ways, but also to allies looking to support women in those spaces. I'm going to hand it over to Tom to do a really brief introduction and get the ball rolling for us.
Thanks, Olivia. So I think the first thing I want to do is welcome everybody here and then introduce our group, first of all, in case you're not familiar with it. So several years ago, we started up a group of advocates and allies for equity, which is which turns out to be the men affiliated with the center. And that has grown considerably over the years, and part of what we do is to sort of produce content like this that's thinking specifically about allyship and although gender kind of broadly focused in on gender equity, because that kind of fits the mission of the center. And so today, the content of this particular workshop is actually on traps in allyship. So what are the things when you're thinking about being an ally, especially for gender equity? What are some of the traps that you might occur along that journey? And so here we go. So the first thing we want to do is a land acknowledgement here. And so I'll just pause a minute and let everybody read this slide before I move on. Okay, so the outline for today's presentation is that what I'm going to do is kind of frame the conversation that we're going to have here today. And then, I think make a, there we go. And then specifically define what we mean by traps, because that's a good word to put in a title, but in talking about it, we need a good definition. Then I'm going to hand it over to some of my co-moderators, and we're going to break those traps into 3 different categories or types and move through them. And then potentially the most important part is that we're going to talk about how to avoid, or if you stumble into one of these traps, how do you get out of it? And so one of the main sort of outcomes that we want you to get out of this workshop is a better alignment of intent and impact in allyship. And this is going to be a motif that runs through the entire workshop. So that's why it's kind of highlighted here, is the alignment or the similarity between our intent in being an ally and the impact that our actions actually produce. In sort of focusing in on that intent impact relationship, what we're going to do is identify some common traps that we might fall into in our journey, and as I said before, then build some skills to actually step out of those traps if you happen to get caught. Okay, so framing the conversation. So the idea here is hopefully, likely, that everybody here is interested in allyship, and everybody is interested in being even a better ally for gender equity. And so the idea of putting together a workshop on traps kind of almost seems like we're focusing maybe on some negative aspects of allyship, but we want to kind of turn that around. So the first part of that is that even if we do make mistakes, that that doesn't mean that they came from not from a well-intentioned place. And in fact, making mistakes are opportunities for us to actually learn how to be better moving forward. And then the other thing is allyship takes responsibility. And so presumably that's one of the reasons that you are here today, is that here is an opportunity for you to progress and grow along the allyship journey that you have started on. Okay, so now what do we mean by traps? So the presentation is about traps in allyship. So what do we really mean? And as I said before, this is going to largely rely on this relationship between the intent and the impact of your actions as an ally. So in the best case scenario, the intent and the impact are aligned, or they're very similar. And so what you intended from your actions is going to produce the intended impact. But that isn't going to always be the case. Sometimes your intent and your impact are incongruent or not similar to each other, and your well-meaning intent might lead to an impact or an outcome that was unexpected. So two things moving forward is, how do you avoid those situations? How do you keep your intent and your impact congruent with each other? And the second thing is, if you happen to fall into a situation or where they are not congruent, or in other words, fall into a trap, how do you, what's the best way to get out of that situation? Not get out of it, but to handle that situation without stumbling into another trap, for instance. And so what we're going to do is divide up the traps that we want to highlight today into three different categories. Some of the traps have to do with your motivation for wanting to be an ally. Some of the traps have to do with the specific actions or specific overt behaviors that you produce in trying to engage in allyship. And as I said, we're going to focus on gender allyship today. And then finally, there is a language that we often use to describe our allyship activities. And we want to make sure that we're using the right words when we're talking about our allyship journey and trying to be allies to other people. Okay, so I'm going to hand it over then to our next presenter to start off the motivations and mindsets part.
So that's me. Hi, I am Jamie Prankert, and I'm a faculty member and the Executive Associate Dean for Faculty and Research at the Kelley School of Business. I've been involved with the Advocates and Allies for Equity group for going on 4 years. So it's really good to be here with you today. I want to talk through a few of these traps that we have identified and classified as dealing with the motive behind allyship and hoped for a desire to be an ally, the motivations and the mindset that come behind it. Now, as Tom pointed out, these motivations, the behaviors, the language, they're in conversation and influencing each other. So motivations and mindset are typically internal, and so some of the impact that we'll talk about manifest themselves in behaviors and language, and that's how those impacts sometimes diverge given the motive. But these motives often have intents that are quite positive, quite well aligned with being an ally, but can manifest themselves then in ways that don't really have that intended impact, just as Tom was talking about. So the first one is, I think, a common one that has this intent that is intended to, that is to really show that I have a stake in being an ally. So the family matters motivation. You'll hear people sometimes use language that manifests this motivation as, well, because I'm a parent of a daughter, because I'm a father of a daughter, because I really had my eyes opened when I got married, or I became a parent of a daughter. Those are good things, right? Like the investment in understanding that really are impacts that one may not have recognized before is a good thing. The problem, the potential trap is that in voicing or manifesting the motivation to be an ally in that way, one can indicate, perhaps wrongly, that the only reason that they care is because they've found a reason to have a personal connection, and that without that personal connection, they would not have been interested in being an ally. And of course, allyship is important regardless of that personal connection. And so there's this sometimes this distinction between not suddenly developing this empathetic view, but that isn't really motivated by understanding and coming alongside everyone that doesn't have that relationship. And because of that, it can distance oneself from those who aren't in the position of being in the family or the connection. And that so as I indicated, that the importance comes through the proxy of having that relationship as opposed to its fundamental humanity. So again, this is one of those situations where it's really great to have have a reason to have buy-in, but if that doesn't then mature beyond that connection, it can really create that chasm that we call the trap. The second one, just to sort of run through these examples of traps that we're kind of setting up in the rubric that we've created, is this notion of parallel experiences. So, communicating that all experiences are generally the same, and I want to join in because I have had a similar experience. That in my mind, the experience is similar. That may be a great motivation again of sort of being in solidarity and having a commitment to that's really the desire that one has in coming from this parallel experiences mindset. But the problem, as you can see, is that sometimes that solidarity and understanding aren't always completely overlapping. And importantly, one of the themes that you will see throughout a number of these traps is the supposed allies centering themselves as the focus of the allyship, as opposed to really focusing on what is it that is specific and unique and important to the experience of the person or the group of people I am really need to be an ally to. And of course, one result is if I try to merge all experiences into the same, that it then erases the unique experience that that those I'm supposedly aligning with actually have. Another motive that can be that can create one of those chasms between intent and impact, the notion of I'm coming in to be a hero. So that hero mindset can be a real issue, and it can come from really great place again of particularly if someone's come into a recognition of their own privilege and taking on that call to use one's privilege to for good and to create space and to advocate. But that can create a situation where it's pedantic, infantilizing, that even though what I hope to do is to create space for someone to empower someone else, instead what I'm doing is making the process all about myself and potentially removing the agency and the hoped for ability of the group of people or the individual I'm trying to be an ally to really step into their own and me to take a step back. Here's one that I think is really an interesting potential trap because it comes from a really great place, right? Like, we are motivated to do those things that make us feel good. And often those things that make us feel good are because we want to be good people and we want to do good things. So if my motivation is I'm an ally because it makes me feel good to do it, that's probably okay in many instances, particularly if it's among a mix of motivations, but it does have a potential downside and impact if that motivation turns into behaviors and language and other indicators to someone else that creates an impact of they're really only a tool to my own self-worth and self-identity, and that you know, the only motivation I have to do the right thing is because it makes me feel good, not because it actually is the right and important and humane and the best thing to do. Finally, this one is one that we really, as advocates, male advocates and allies for equity, try to we avoid. We try to equip those who come to our trainings and our workshops and the conversations that we have to really get more knowledge, to become more to further develop their sensitivity and their understanding, but it can lead to, boy, I got this little bit of training, you know, so the sort of notion of the little bit of knowledge is maybe the most dangerous thing. But I got a little bit of training, now I know what I need, so I'm going to rush right in. And that's great if the intent is to be enthusiastic, to take the knowledge and information and awakening understanding of a world that perhaps somebody didn't have before and move forward and to be a confident ally. The problem is that it often is then, or it can be paired with an over enthusiasm that becomes infantilizing and patronizing and you know, grabs the mic in a way that doesn't allow the voices that one hopes to be amplifying to be heard. And the other thing is that it can sort of hide the little bit of knowledge behind you know, a well actually mindset, that it doesn't really internalize anything, but just give someone a tool to be further knowledgeable and maybe push people away. So these are examples that we came up with of some, I think, fairly common traps that can come from motivations. I talked through a number of these, and I want to throw it to my co-presenters to consider or maybe give some examples of where they have either done, experienced, or witnessed these kinds of traps in practice.
Well, this is Nathan. I am a father of a daughter, and I find myself, even though I'm aware, talking about her now, partly because she's my youngest daughter. I'm proud of her, and she's at the stage in her education where she's doing all kinds of things. But I realize the message that communicates to people who maybe don't know the whole story, and I've become very aware of not using her as some kind of special example or special credential that I have.
So I will quickly say that an example that I think is true of me is needing to really check myself on the warm fuzzies, that it feels good to do the right thing. And checking myself on, is it the right thing for me because it's making me feel good, or is it the right thing because it is the right thing and it is actually engaging in real, substantial allyship. I'm particularly notice this of myself when I send, when I think about sending messages, either actual messages, emails, or send messages in meetings of sort of speaking up on behalf of someone else, thinking like, wow, I feel really good that I brought attention to this. But that's only worthwhile if what was actually happening was advancing the interest that was underlying it, that is not me just feeling good. And I think we'll talk a little bit about the strategies, and I think that one of the strategies that when I find myself in walking up to that precipice is that pause to think about what's my motivation here and what am I actually accomplishing.
Okay, sorry about that. I'm going to jump in on language. It turns out that we're using remote control. After you've requested remote control, you no longer have access to unmute yourself. So heads up to the people coming up next. Very good. Thank you for the handoff, Jamie. So as already been mentioned, we kind of tried to categorize these things into 3 different general umbrellas, and I'm going to be talking about the language one. But again, you'll probably see similar themes between some of the things I'm talking about and some of the things Jamie talked about, and also, what Nathan will talk about next. So I'll try to point some of those out, and you'll probably notice others that I haven't noticed. So again, we have these kind of pithy names. For example, the first one I'm going to be talking about is the all access pass. So the kind of more general description is this is talking about allyship as something that's universal. So again, the intent that we're coming to this with is most of the time good, right? In this case, it's something where we want to communicate about power and privilege systems. On the other hand, the impact doesn't necessarily fall in line with the intent. So we wanted to communicate about these, but in fact, the impact could be that it flattens individual marginalized communities or makes it, kind of boils it down to an essentialism of experience. And it took me a little bit to wrap my head around this. And I think we can all think about these, different examples in our own ways, but I'm coming at this as a physics teacher. I should have said, my name is Chris Meyer and I am in the physics department. I've been with the advocates and the allies for about a year now. But coming as a physicist, I could say as kind of a side example, what if I wanted to learn about the engine of a car? Well, as a physicist, I would say, well, take a mechanics class, take a thermodynamics class. Those basic principles, those essential elements of the working of an engine, would explain it among many other things. But boiling it down to that essential aspect doesn't necessarily help me talk about engines. I probably want to go to a mechanic to learn about engines, right? And I think this maps to here because you can understand some of the basics of communicating about power and privilege, but unless you know the nuances about, say, a particular marginalized community that you're trying to talk with, or you're communicating about, you're probably going to go in a direction you don't necessarily want to. So right, talking about allyship as a universal is something we can often fall into, and I find myself falling into sometimes as well, among other things. So going on to the second one, this one is called What's in a Name. So this is where you claim allyship as a label, but not necessarily as a practice. So it's somehow an item on your resume, but it's not something that you do besides putting it on your resume, right? Perhaps the intent is to signal commitment. This is perhaps a good intentioned reading of that. But the impact is if you're claiming to be an ally, but not really walking the walk, so to speak, you're going to create distrust of you, but moreover, you're going to dilute the meaning of what it means to be an ally. If many people are allies in name only, then what does it mean to be an ally? Perhaps this is not something to aspire to or something that's even helpful, right? So the intent is perhaps to signal commitment to a cause you do think is important, but if you're not actually committed, then just signaling it is something that can backfire. So moving on to the third one. This maps a little bit to the hero mindset that Jamie was talking about earlier, right? So this is speaking and not listening. So this is where you're monopolizing perhaps a conversation on something like marginalization. And the intent is to talk about it, right? To make it something, to make people understand that it is a real thing and to emphasize the problems that come from equity and inclusion. But the impact is perhaps it's not necessarily your place to talk about it. Perhaps it's your place to set a space to talk about it, but you don't need to do all of the talking, right? If you're doing all of the talking, you're likely silencing people of that community that have something to say. And it can also be quite patronizing to have you doing the talking as if you know better than them, right? So this is an example of a good intent, but the impact is perhaps not quite so good. And this is kind of the polar opposite of the next one, this speaking too much. On the other hand, there can be such a thing as speaking too little. Okay, so if you don't speak up in a conversation about privilege, kind of since we're coming at this from gender equality, the silence of the man, the intent is, well, I don't want to monopolize the conversation, right? I want to remain respectful and let them have a space, and perhaps I'm afraid of making a mistake. The intent is good. I want to give them a place or somebody a place to talk about it, but the impact is if you say nothing at all, you can come across as disinterested or just not committed. Or perhaps you could be seen as elevating your own comfort to being more important to you than destabilizing privilege, right? Is it more comfortable that more important that you're comfortable, or that you perhaps make other people comfortable in the long run? So right, this is perhaps an overcompensation of the above one. And then there's one more I'll briefly mention before passing it off. Whoa. And that is the backhanded compliment, or using a stereotype that's masked as flattery. So the intent is to compliment something about somebody, to emphasize a good trait, but perhaps when doing that, you rely on a stereotype of that group. So many groups can probably sympathize with them being stereotyped in part by how they dressed, okay? And let's say you're at a poster presentation and you walk up to somebody presenting a poster and you say, wow, you look really professional. Potentially that could be seen as a compliment, and it could be meant as a compliment. But on the other hand, that's not what the poster presentation of their research is about, right? First of all, it creates a good versus bad. You have the looking professional and the not looking professional, and one is clearly good and one is clearly bad. You're also creating a form of exceptionalism because you're the one giving that compliment. You're clearly good and you're elevating them up to your level, right? You're creating this distinction of good and bad and kind of reinforcing it even more. And then finally, benevolent oppression is still oppression. It just has a fancy word in front of it. So, in the case of saying, wow, you look really professional, the more appropriate thing to say would have been something like about the research, perhaps. This is really interesting research, or I have a question about this, interacting with them directly about why they're there, not just trying to find a compliment that, stems from stereotypes or not. So that's kind of the things we set aside as language. Similar to Jamie, I want to pause for a second and see if any of my co-facilitators have any of their own experiences that kind of can lend to this or fall into any of these categories before we go on to Nathan and his talking about behavior. I guess I can kind of start and say that the silence of the man is something that I, as a young faculty member, perhaps struggled with quite a bit as a graduate student, and then also as a young faculty member, and one who's wanting to get tenure at some point, right? Do you want to speak up and risk not getting tenure? That's perhaps not how you should be looking at it. It's a challenging line to toe, and something that I've become more aware of and learned how to, kind of fall in the middle somewhere. So that's something that I have struggled with myself.
So I would say that that my experience is I have had the same experience, Chris, and one of the things that then I dealt with too was not overcorrecting to then, as you sort of flagged when you were going through them, that these are in some ways two sides of one coin if you're not very careful, sort of a heavy coin. There's lots of room in between it, but speaking too much, one sort of checking on the, well, okay, I need to speak up because that's what an ally does, not speaking up so much that you suck all the air out of the room. And particularly as, you move from potentially from sort of the new person or a junior faculty member to somebody with more institutional influence and authority, you can quite quickly silence other people by speaking up in a way that doesn't allow for room for others to actually, particularly others whose experience you're speaking about may be able to provide much more context. So in that vein, I'm going to shut up and also ask our attendees if they have any examples or thoughts they would like to share about these that we've gone through so far.
Are the attendees able to speak in this setting in Whova? Okay.
Thank you, Chris, for the heads up about unmuting myself before I took control. I think I've got everything set. My name is Nathan Ensminger. I'm an associate professor in the informatics department, and I'm going to be talking about kind of what traps can look like in terms of behavior. And there's some obvious overlap between these different ways of thinking about this, but I think also some subtle differences. So one of the things to be aware of is what we're calling pigeonholed networking. And this is the idea that you kind of make connections on the basis of a particular aspect of identity. So you have a new female faculty member, you introduce her to other female faculty members, you connect her to other female faculty members across the university. When I was chair, maybe I would assign her a female faculty member as a mentor. These are all motivated by the idea that there are some unique challenges, particularly in a STEM discipline like mine. You want to help people network. You want to provide them with the kinds of support that they would need and increase their visibility. But the flip side of that, of course, is that you're reinforcing the idea that what matters most is their particular identity, or that one aspect of identity. By only connecting them with people who share that identity, you might limit their exposure. You might prevent them from having productive collaborations and networking with the people that they need to. And obviously that's a limit on them. Now, of course, there may be female faculty members who want a female mentor, but you shouldn't assume that. And you should ask before you do these things. And there's also an aspect of this which is kind of negative, which is warning people away. Oh, you should avoid so-and-so because he's a noted bigot. Well, that might be a useful warning, but not connecting that person who could have a real professional collaboration may not be accomplishing the result that you intend. Okay. Representation without compensation. So we all know that underrepresented groups often get assigned to be the spokesperson for that group, which means they get extra work, extra students, extra committees, extra pressure to speak up. And obviously that's not a good thing. There are also ways in which simply by highlighting the work that they're already doing in the context of their identity, that you may be falling into a kind of trap. The goal here, or the intent, is to promote the visibility of these people, to highlight their voices within a department which is maybe not accustomed to listening to them. But the unintended consequence of that is that once again, you might be extracting labor from them without the proper payment. And of course, as academics, we have many currencies in circulation, which could include actual money, which is one of my favorites, but also things like citation and reputation and opportunity, which have similar kinds of value. This is very much related to Chris's point about what's in a name, but the focus here is on the things that you do rather than simply what you say. And that is the trap here is claiming allyship without the corresponding actions that would back that up. The intent is to be an ally. You want to seek out information. You want to do the right thing. But without actually acting on that, you can create distrust. You can dilute the notion of an ally. If everybody signs up to be a male advocate and ally and doesn't do anything, it diminishes the impact of this organization and the kinds of things we're trying to do. And so this relates to the kinds of language you're using, but this is also about the things that you do on a regular basis. Sorry seems to be the hardest word. If there's a kind of overall message of this session, or at least the conversations that we had about these traps, it was one, don't make it about yourself. And there are many ways and forms in which allies can do that. And the second is, you're going to make mistakes. If you're taking this seriously, if you're turning your ideas into action, you will make some mistakes. And sometimes we respond negatively to these kinds of critiques. Not saying you're sorry, or saying you're sorry in a way that isn't a true apology is a kind of recognition that some harm has been done, but without taking responsibility for having caused that harm. There can be ways in which by responding negatively or defensively to critique, you're distancing yourselves from that harm. And perhaps most insidiously, you can suggest that what mattered most were your intentions. When what the people you're trying to be an ally with really care about impact. It doesn't matter what you wanted to do. What matters is what happened. This is a difficult one, and it's not difficult because of a lack of knowledge. If you go out on the internet, there are many guides to making a true apology. There seems to be a pretty universal consensus on what the elements of that kind of apology ought to be. You should be sincere and honest in your apology. You should express regret and remorse in your apology. You should offer perhaps an explanation for your behavior, but not an excuse for your behavior. And most importantly, you should agree to make changes in the future and request forgiveness. So that's easy to say and very difficult to do. I'll maybe segue right into personal accounts, and then I'll ask for examples from the rest of our group or from our participants. But sorry is hard. It is really hard to take responsibility and to apologize, not that somebody else got offended, not because you're sorry that they're so difficult, but sorry because you caused them harm. And I think we all have examples in our personal relationships that are fairly easy to translate into our professional relationships and relationships within our organizations. So those are our 4 behaviors that we wanted to highlight. And again, maybe I'll open up to either other panelists or participants about specific examples of these 4 behaviors.
One thing I wanted to say that's not a specific example, but I do want to note that we owe a lot to Olivia, who, as we would have these ideas about these potential traps, she came up with not only the excellent conceptualization, but the really creative names for them that make this far easier to remember, and I think it would have been a far less good presentation without her creativity. So thank you, Olivia.
Yes, most definitely. Okay, with that, I'm going to relinquish remote control and allow us to move forward to the next step.
And oddly enough, that is me. So I'll just say thank you, JB, for that recognition. So we've talked a lot about here traps that we can fall into. Here is where our intent and our impact can have a wide dearth between them, and we've fallen into that hole. So maybe you're listening and you're thinking, you know, oh, well, this seems like it's all too much. You know, maybe I shouldn't try. You're falling into that trap again where you don't want to try. You feel like you're going to make a mistake. And what we want to do now is spend a little bit of time talking about some of the ways, very simple ways that you can start to avoid some of those traps. You can recognize them before you've fallen into them, or you can start the process of trying to step out of them. Let's see. I will. There we go. So you've already started the first step. Congratulations, you're here. You want to learn about what do these traps look like. You know, they can exist in different areas of allyship too. Obviously, this group and the organization it's under deals a lot with gender equity, but a lot of these ways as white people or people who are able-bodied, people who are of higher income, et cetera. There are ways that we can all learn and take these particular tips into our other spheres of allyship as well. So you've already started the first step, and that's a great first step. But when we think about the actions we take as allies, right, the things that we want to do, we can have reflection that happens before we take action and afterwards. Am I making this about me? Am I listening to the person that I'm trying to be an ally to, that I hurt or that pointed out the issue? You can ask these questions or versions of these questions before you take action, and it will only make that action even better. And then if something happens that maybe in your mind you tried something and you could hear the ouch, I know that that's not good. Whatever happened was not what I intended. You can ask those questions and think about in the future, well, I know that I'm recognizing a problem that I'm trying to respond to. How might I adjust that approach or maybe try out a new one? These are meant to not really lead to an intense amount of self-criticism where you're being cruel to yourself, but to really get you to ask questions, to push yourself forward to be a better ally. And Nathan already did like a really wonderful intro to this, so we don't even need to spend that much time on it. But one of the bigger steps when we make mistakes, and this applies into all of the mistakes, even beyond allyship, is learning how to apologize. And one of the ways that people can kind of mess up, as we've already talked about, is that they really emphasize their intention. They make excuses. They go, well, I was trying to help. You know, don't be mad at me. Don't pay attention to where I messed up. But if you want to be a real ally, you need to recognize in your privilege, right, that there have been legacies of impact over and over and over that have been justified over and over and over again. And dealing with your privilege is saying, you know what, I did something and it hurt you, and it comes from this place of power and privilege, and putting it out there so that the other person can recognize that you see where you've made a mistake. And again, just emphasizing the effect either on the person that told you it hurt them or on the kind of greater community. This often happens, unfortunately, after an organization takes an action that people call out, and they will sometimes have kind of these wishy-washy apologies as a group. And you'll see they feel very hollow. They apologize for something happening, but they didn't really emphasize what that effect had on the people that maybe were excluded. And then dealing with the fallout. One of the things that people really struggle with when they have been told that they have done wrong, they want to make it right. They want to decide, this is the action that I will take to make it right. While that is, again, well-intentioned, sometimes you're not considering the needs of the person. You've created this impact. Maybe you don't understand, how do I negate that impact that I've had? So you should allow space for the other person to tell you, you hurt me and this is what I need from you. Take yourself out of the equation. Let them determine what is the appropriate restitution for that moment. And unfortunately, and not even really unfortunately, but reality, you will not always be absolved. There are going to be people that, for whatever reason, you hurt and they don't trust you. They don't want to come to you and give you forgiveness. That should not stop you from being an ally. If you hear someone who says, you know what, I'm not going to forgive you, that hurt me in a way that I am not ready to forgive you, if your response is, well, I'm upset by that, I won't help in the future, then you've fallen into one of those traps where you're making it about, you want to feel good, you want to feel like you're empowering someone. So again, all of these stages, all of these suggestions we're giving, if you really build in that reflection that we talked about earlier, it can really help you avoid making apologies that are hollow, avoid responding negatively in a space where you're supposed to be being an ally, creating a space for equity and equitable relationships. So with all of that in mind, we wanted to, for very briefly, break people out into breakout rooms and maybe practice what would it look like if someone told me I had messed up, I or organization or something I'm a part of, I messed up as an ally and I need to make an apology. Thinking about the kind of reflection that might go into that apology, what you might say. We have decided to, we came up with 2 scenarios, and we're going to break you all out into small breakout rooms. And those of you who are assigned to odd rooms, your scenario is that you had said something to a Black woman. You said, "You're so eloquent, excuse me," to a Black woman, and someone called you out for doing that. And the other side, those who are assigned even numbered rooms, you just realize that you as a man, and we'll role play here if folks here do not identify as a man, you participated in a panel about sexism in your field, and you realize that there were no women on the panel. Nobody was invited to speak who has the identity that was being discussed, the system of power and privilege and marginalization that was being discussed. So we'll get to making you, you should get invited to a breakout room very soon here. And then we'll have some of our presenters kind of weed in and out in the conversation and be there to just support and get the conversation going. So if you give me 1 second, you should have, yep, people are joining. I will, let's see, slowly getting people in. I'm going to move people to looks like, sorry, I'm trying to see, we've got a couple people just waiting to go into rooms. What I think we'll do, since we have just 3 rooms, let's have 2 advocates. Actually, Sorry, I'm like trying to do the math here. I think people left. Can we put Marcus Reyes Kaz into room 3? Cool. Thank you. We'll give a moment. I don't know. Okay. People are slowly but surely moving in. I will have folks join in the other rooms. So Kaz, if you just want to like randomly assign some of our presenters into groups, thanks, Kaz. Our wonderful tech demo person.
Sorry, I realized that I didn't ask you if you wanted me to assign the presenter's room.
Totally okay. And I just want to say a special shout out to both you and Hannah for all of your lovely work and support on the back end, because holy cannoli, is this a lot to deal with. This is like a full-time job kind of situation. So I just appreciate the both of you. What I'm going to do, I think, while people are in the rooms, I'm going to give them like 4 minutes. Granted, I think most people are probably going to leave, which is sad, but I'm getting the sense.
Sorry, you had like really good attendance. And then like, as you were talking about the role playing, I just saw everyone like leaving as I was making the breakout rooms. And I was like, well.
Oh, did a bunch of people leave like as they were being made? Oh gosh.
It was fun making them.
Dang.
People are gone. Yeah, I'm wondering if like virtual sessions in this kind of setting, maybe we should not have made them as interactive.
It's also okay. So the part of it, I think, is that you had a lot of, I'm basing this off of the names of the participants. So it's obviously not, I think you had a lot of women in here. So they were kind of like, I don't need to role play like.
Yeah, I noticed that as well.
Yeah, and it was mostly the women who were leaving.
I mean, that happens. I think we try to be everything to everybody all the time. And then people get confused, wires get crossed.
Yes.
So I could not see anything when I was not. Welcome back, everyone. I know that it was a little bit of a shorter breakout session, but I hope there was fruitful conversation going on. But just as kind of a review of everything we've covered, it can be hard when we're trying to be allies and we're taking bold step forward in wanting to do good by the people that we are allied to. But it's important to remember that sometimes even our best intentions have a potentially negative outcome, and that it's our duty as a community of people trying to do better in the world and become agents for undoing power, privilege, and oppression, that a lot of these things can sneak in and they may not be on our attention, maybe something that we hadn't really thought about critically before. But there are ways that we can step back and do better every single time we step forward. And that it's an important reminder that mistakes aren't bad. They don't make us bad allies. It's what we do after those mistakes. It's what we do with the knowledge that comes from those mistakes that's really meaningful and can propel us forward. So I know that Hannah has put in the chat a link to the evaluation. We have a very special competition, I guess you could call it, going on, where people who do evaluations for our sessions, they can be randomly selected. 5 folks will be randomly selected from all of our evaluations to receive a prize. So I really encourage you to do that. You can use the link, or there is the lovely QR code here on the screen. But I invite people, if you want to stick around and ask questions for a little bit, you can definitely do that. Or if you need to go, you're free to go, but you can expect to see these slides and then also recording of this session up on the Whova page shortly in the next couple days. So yeah, thanks for everyone who came to attend, and thanks to our wonderful presenters for sharing their insights and their stories. We'll stick around for maybe a couple minutes, unless I know, Jamie, you're very busy, you might have to go, so it's okay.
I do think so, but I really appreciate it, and thank you, everybody.
Thanks for coming.
And thank you, Olivia. I appreciate it.
Always. Looks like people are slowly trickling out. I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording.